I'm going to preach this morning on the theme, play your part. Play your part. Pastor Jill, when the science fair rolled around last year, my 10-year-old son had a big, bright project idea. He wanted to make a quantum superposition simulation machine. Have you ever heard of that? Me either. It's a machine that was developed at Cambridge University and allows molecules to be in two places at once. Now, needless to say, I talked him out of this by reminding him that we did not have the state-of-the-art research and development equipment that Cambridge University had. But you see, now I regret it, because it would have been really helpful last week to be in two places at once. You see, last afternoon, I got a panicked message from my mother that my grandmother, who's 92 years old, Eliza Jean Davis, better known as Jean, was declining rapidly. My mother issued a call for help across our family text thread and a bit of a warning that our time with her may not be long. This was a really hard message to receive because my grandmother has had an immeasurable impact, just like that, on my life. She is the consummate picture of grace in motion. She is a master memory maker, and she is a high priestess of the culinary arts. I have never entered a room where she was in it that she did not scream out loud, "You are so beautiful," quickly followed by, "Because you look like me." You see, thinking for a moment of a world without her in it, I felt this twinge of grief quickly interrupted by a series of questions. What does she need? How soon can I get there? What should I do with the kids? Who will take the dog? Is this really the end? How much time do I have with her? Oh, and what about Sunday morning? I quickly remembered that last Sunday was First Sunday, and we were kicking off this new worship series, and I was scheduled to preach not at one, but all three services. Where was the quantum superposition simulation machine when you need it? Apparently, it's back there this morning. You see, my grief quickly moved to panic. What was I going to do? How was I going to handle these competing responsibilities? And before I could wrap my mind around all of these questions, I came to one clear answer. We can't do ministry by ourselves. You see, for a moment, I forgot that I was not called to Island of One United Methodist Church, where I was the only one pastor, the only one preacher, or the only one communion server. No, God called me to be part of a whole, where there is not one, but many. A whole team of people, preachers and singers and laity and musicians and ushers and teachers, disciples and servants who are ready and willing to serve our congregation together. And thank God that I am not the only one. Because if it were just up to me, church would fall apart. You see, I pass out after standing too long, so I'd be a really unreliable usher. I lose key the longer that I sing, so I would be a horrible choir section mate. And I have it on the authority of all of my children that whenever I pray, they always wish it would have ended sooner. Why am I sharing this? Because we forget. I forgot it in my moment of panic last week. And the people of Corinth forgot it in our scripture today. For when we interrupt Paul in the 3rd chapter of his letter to the Corinthians, he is trying to remind the people just how much they need one another. You see, several years earlier, Paul had been dispatched to this Greek coastal city to plant a church. He had spent several years there, preaching and teaching, baptizing and growing the church until God called him to plant another one. He was then followed by his successor, Apollos. And like Paul, Apollos was a gifted preacher and teacher, and he furthered the growth of the church. Yet over time, people have forgotten. They have forgotten that Paul's planting of the church was just as important and vital in getting it started as Apollos' watering of the church to where it is today. And instead of celebrating both of these leaders' contributions, they instead valued one over the other, creating division and discord in the process. And so Paul seeks to remind them and us today that no one person's role is more significant than another. We not only need one another to do ministry, but the role that each of us play is irreplaceable. There is no part that's more significant or more important than another. But every role makes a difference. Now, I have learned that not only from reading Corinthians 3, but also from cooking. You'll remember that I shared that my grandmother is a high priestess of the culinary arts, and I believe she learned this in Dalton, Georgia in the 1920s, where she was raised. She told me that anything that showed up on the table had been grown in the field or fished out of the stream. And so she knows how to prepare a chicken from scratch. I'm talking feathers. She knows how to marinate pork in honey and spices to prepare it for roasting. And she knows how to fry shrimp that would make you slap your mother, her grandmother, and her great-grandmother. But the real pièce de résistance, if you will, of my grandmother's cooking is her coconut cake. Now, I don't even like coconut. You will never catch me eating coconut cookies or drinking coconut water. But whenever she puts that fluffy, decadent, perfectly baked cake on the table, I have not one, but 2 or 3 slices. I love this cake so much that I wanted to impress my new husband by baking it when I was a newlywed. So I bought all 22 items on her recipe card. I tied up my apron, I read each step, and then I placed that perfect coconut cake on the table. I poured us extra large glasses of milk. I cut us giant slices, and we each took our first decadent bite. And then we spit it out. I ran back to the kitchen and I realized that I had added the baking soda, the baking powder, the salt, the coconut milk, the sour cream, but I had forgotten the 2 cups of sugar. And without the sugar, coconut cake tastes like cardboard mixed with regret. And it didn't matter that I had all of the other ingredients. I still needed that one. And that's all Paul is trying to teach the people in Corinth and each of us today. We need all of the ingredients. We need each other. We need every role, and not one is more important than another. The salt is not more important than the sugar. The planter is not more important than the waterer. We need every Paul and every Apollos, because each of us has a part to play in God's harvest. So the question today and the question in Corinth wasn't, are you team Paul or team Apollos? The question is whether you're on the team. Are you playing your part today in our shared ministry? Are you serving on an outreach team or growing through a class or Bible study? Are you giving to our ministry? Are you playing your part? Before you answer this question, I want you to consider that there are two features of playing your part in God's ministry. And the first is this: when we play our part, we may never see the finished product. When we play our part, we may never see the finished product. You see, when Paul was writing to the Corinthian church, scholars tell us that it could be anywhere from 5 years to 10 years since he last saw these people in person. He planted those seeds of faith, but then he was called to plant other churches throughout Asia Minor. And so God sent Apollos to water them until the church grew so large that there were enough people to fight in the first place. And since Paul's departure, it's likely that there are members of the church he's never met, members of the choir whose voices he's never heard, people ushering at the door who never saw him walk through it, or even children that were born long after he left. Paul planted seeds of faith at the church in Corinth, but never saw many of them grow. Because here it is: when we play our part in God's ministry, we may never see the finished product. We may never see what takes root. We may never see the first shoots of leaves. We may never see the first fruits. But we have to be willing to sow seeds in a harvest that we may never reap. And this is hard. This is hard for us to do because we live in a world where we ask not, what will this reap after me? But rather, what will this reap for me right now? We live in a world that seeks a quick return, instant gratification, and immediate benefits. But the work of God is not completed in just a few days or months or even years. It takes time. It's deeply rooted, and it's connected to the faithful care of many, many, many people over time. Let me see if I can make this a bit more plain. Have you ever heard of the term food desert? It describes a place where there's no viable grocery stores within city limits, and it also described Atlantic City, where my husband and I served our first congregation after we were married. He was the lead pastor of a teeny tiny little United Methodist church called Hamilton Memorial. It couldn't have seated more than 100 people comfortably, and the district superintendent told him that this would be a caretaking role, as it wasn't expected for the church to survive. But one Sunday morning, Javon couldn't help but see this patch of land next to the church where a field of wildflowers was growing. He knew the church was in decline. He knew the city was a food desert, but God planted a seed that maybe something could grow here. And so we got this group of members and leaders together, and we began to vision for just 1 or 2 raised beds that could provide fresh fruit and vegetables for people in our food desert community. But then that seed got planted in a restaurant owner who decided to donate all of the fruits and vegetables that we would need. Then that seed got planted in a city official who campaigned to have that land donated to the church free of charge. Then that seed got planted in an architecture firm who then designed a green space with multiple raised beds, as well as an amphitheater and picnic tables for the community to gather. And then that seed got planted in a group of artists who donated their services to paint a mural of a community not in decline, but a community growing and revitalizing. We were so excited about the first planting. We were so excited about the harvest that we would see. But then we got a call from the district superintendent. He shared that Javon would be reappointed to a much larger congregation in northern New Jersey, and that we would leave before we ever saw the first harvest grow in. At first, we were heartbroken because it's a natural desire to want to see the fruit of our labor. But here's the hard truth we learned that day. It was never ours. And it's not yours either. Sure, we each play a part. As Paul reminds the Corinthians, he planted, Apollos watered, but only God can make it grow. And when we look back over what was once a plan for 1 or 2 raised garden beds in the midst of a food desert, we realize that only God could have connected us to a restaurant owner and a city official and architects and a construction company and artists. And we realized that our labor was nothing compared to the labor that God had put in to make this garden grow. We may have planted, we may have watered, but it was nothing compared to the growth of God. This is both a challenge and a comfort for us. It's a challenge because it requires us to trust in a harvest that we may never see. But it's a comfort because of who we trust it to. A God who takes those seeds and grows it into something more abundant, more fruitful, more impactful than anything we could ever grow alone. And so what is God calling us to do today? To play our part. To keep planting. To keep watering. To keep working together while trusting in the only one who can give us growth. May you find and play your part today in God's great harvest.